After a string of primary wins in very blue states, I might add, the Democratic Socialists of America are increasingly becoming a political force. With more than 120,000 members nationwide. Yesterday, I traveled to Chicago for the DSA's National Organizing Summit, where I sat down with members and got their insight on key issues and some things they say have been misrepresented in the media. Let's talk about the platform.
Sure.
You know, what's interesting is abolish the police is not in here.
The language that we actually have about the criminal justice system talks about how currently our police and prison system is stacked toward persecuting poor people and excusing rich people's crimes. I personally have no problem with having something called a prison be the place where people like that are kept if they can't be rehabilitated.
So why is abolish prisons the thing? Is it just that it is...
The language that we have in there is abolishing the police and prison system that protects capital over people. These horrible crimes that have been perpetrated by some of the most powerful people in society are being protected by this system, which is instead mostly going after people for, having some weed or for jumping a turnstile on the trains.
Do you guys see yourself as the left wing of the Democratic Party?
I think if the Democratic Party was actually delivering on the things that they say they care about and what is listed in their platform, I would feel comfortable saying yes to that.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no.
If we were to be considered part of the left wing of the Democratic
Party, do you consider
Party,
yourself?
I would wonder what happened to the right or the center of the Democratic Party. I think that should be where a lot of the focus goes. Why you have so many Democrats who are comfortable accepting corporate campaign contributions, so many Democrats that are excited about wars of intervention across our country that are, costing the country valuable resources. So I think that some of the focus ought to go to what happened to the right or center if people would construe us as the left.
So, guys, I think what I thought was really interesting and what I left with was that they're also understanding that this is a moment that they haven't had before and that they actually have to appear more serious. When I was talking to the co-chair at the beginning there, one of the other parts of the conversation was that, they know that people see them as like silly little kids that are playing politics, where in fact they could, take all of the anger that's happening in this country and transition it into something real. And so when you talk about, that little pamphlet I had was something that they were giving out to everyone. And what was not in there was the stuff that has gotten the most attention from their platform. That's on 2 pages. We have this in element 1. There are a lot of things on there, but what wasn't in that paper was there was no abolish the U.S. Senate, which has gotten them pilloried. There was no abolish the Defense Department. There was there was nothing about defunding the police. That was not in there. And what he said to me was, this document that I was holding in my hand was put together in the last month. So to me, that signals that there may be some changes coming to the platform.
Changes to the written platform, but is it changes philosophically or ideologically?
Right.
That's coming is what I wonder. I can't remember how much time do we have left, because you do
like 2 something.
Oh, here, let's play. Plenty of time. Let's use more from Eugene's interviews at the DSA yesterday in Chicago. This is element 2, and Eugene asking about the DSA being used as a cudgel against the Democratic Party.
A part of politics is to understand when you're being used as a cudgel and how people are viewing you, whether that's Republicans using you guys as a cudgel and to try to paint the entire Democratic Party. How do you think about that? Because it is something that I imagine you have to weigh.
Yeah, and I hear the concerns of people within the Democratic Party who believe that by moving to the left, we're going to alienate a certain percentage of potentially reachable Republicans.
Or even just normal Democrats.
Yeah, and even within that space, though, I think I like what Zoran said, which is that what is a party but its voters? And the voters have been showing up consistently for progressive Democratic Socialist candidates.
If it's not going to be on anyone's ballot anytime soon, and you know that it's going to be used as a cudgel, why put it on the platform?
I think the main reason is political honesty.
I mean, okay, political honesty. Y'all want to win? But he said a name that I had been thinking about since you've been in Chicago, and that is, he said Zoran. He means Zoran Mamdani, the Democratic Socialist mayor of New York. I'm not sure, I don't know if you were there when the mayor spoke, but how much does Mayor Mamdani galvanize and energize the folks who were gathered there in Chicago?
One, he was not there.
Okay.
I called his staff and I double checked because that was something I thought they would at least try to get him there, the folks. He and AOC are at the center of what they're trying to do. There is no one that has been for them more of an example of what they're trying to do and how they can do it in governance than Zoran Mamdani, right? And you look at the ways in which he's operated, and he hasn't shied away from some of the things that folks want them to shy away from, but he has had to compromise, and that came up a little bit. And I think most importantly for me, leaving was it's still unclear whether or not they see themselves as a part of the insurgency within the Democratic Party or something outside. And also, they weren't attacking Republicans as much, which I thought was also very interesting.
I know we're out of time, but Eugene, I'm glad you did this. It's super interesting and informative to me. I do have a follow-up question for the break, which is, what is the difference between being a progressive and being a card-carrying DSA member?
I mean, that's easy. They only have 120,000 people. So, like, every DSA member is progressive. Every progressive is not a DSA member.
But what is the difference ideologically?
I think ideologically, I think the DSA is much further to the left. Like, I think there are a lot of progressives who look at trying to abolish the U.S. Senate as something they're not interested in. But they are very interested in abolishing ICE or abolishing student debt. So, like, there are those kinds of ideological differences do exist there.
All right, we'll keep talking about it. Also, it makes me sad to see John Ball as a producer on this, probably for the last time, but we'll talk more about that.
Shout out to him
John
and Raven,
Ball,
who were fabulous in putting this together so quickly. So thank you both.
Yeah, he was there yesterday, and he came back last night.
Yes.
We're going to have, okay, but we're actually going to leave it there right now.